All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CHP podcast. My name is Ariana, and I am your host. I am here today with two guests.
Oh,
I have Alex Viata. Hello, hello. And Trevor Tartaglia. Both of them are here today to help us discuss, and hopefully we will disagree to make this more interesting. But we just wanted to discuss what we consider to be the sort of top 20 training priorities based on just frequent questions we're asked. We get asked the same things constantly. Should we deload? How do you manage your training intensity? Should we track our steps? So things like that. And we're going to rate them kind of as a group and see if we consider different things, different priority levels. And then hopefully you guys will, our listeners, will agree with at least one of us by the end of it. So, softballing us in, frequently asked questions. Alex, you do a Q&A every single week. So some of these are going to be pretty familiar.
oh man, I'm doing a Q&A possibly later this afternoon too. No, actually I'm going to do it tomorrow. So,
Okay.
yeah, right. Q&A mode.
Yes. So before we jump in, knowing that you do these every single week, I know you get hundreds of questions every time. Would you say that a lot of them are on this list?
Interestingly,
Besides the really hyper-specific ones.
interestingly enough, I think a lot of the Q&A questions I get are kind of hyper-specific because one of the things I really think is that when people feel like they can get an answer to their specific issue, that's what they like to ask. It's almost more of a like, hey, I've got this thing going on. Can you help me a little bit more? And that's sometimes why I struggle with the Q&As because they're hyper-specific. And I'm going, wow,
Yeah.
I can answer this one question that one person's going to be interested in, but what I always wish I got was actually more of these sort of general questions because I feel like obviously everyone's got little issues that they worry about. They're like, hey, I've got this particular issue. I'm not making progress because of this, or, I've got this event coming up. And I'm like, if you followed a lot of these fundamental list of priorities, you would find that you might not even be in this situation to begin with. So, yeah.
And that kind of goes in line with when I made the list. I went with a lot of general categories, and these categories could be broken down into subcategories and subcategories of subcategories. And hopefully, what we interpret the actual general category to mean will also cause some kind of discussion where, I understood general nutrition to mean this, and when this is what I get asked about a lot. So this is why I put it in the second most important place or least important place, and then we'll get into kind of that nuance about some of these categories as well.
We should do this on one of those tier list things. You ever seen those on YouTube when they dude, like this is S tier right here, and this is like C tier. We should
just do that. We'll do it. I'll do it later.
We'll do that.
I did not prepare my homework of the image, but
I think
we'll do it.
Yeah.
So to kick things off, I think it would be good if Ariana, if you wanted to read off the list in just the general order without being placed, so that people can kind of see where we're at and then kind of anticipate where we might place things in a certain order.
Yep. So I'm going to read off the sort of top 20 frequently asked questions. Like Trevor said, they're like 10,000 foot views. So they could get more specific, and we probably will get in the weeds with a lot of them because that is our jam. But in the list of 1 to 20, we've got individualized coaching, NEAT, structured training, general nutrition, intra-workout nutrition, sleep, training periodization, training volume, training specificity, extra recovery, like cold plunges, saunas, rolling out thera, body work, which would be massages, stretching and mobility, mental grit, consistency, training intensity, training environment, equipment, wearables and like data tools, so like smartwatches, power meters, things like that, supplements like creatine, stimulants, caffeine, protein, and then specific special supplements, which would be like fat burners, testosterone boosters, and basically anything that you're being sold at a podcast.
This is sponsored
So.
by.
Ugh.
I don't normally.
I can't
like
tell you how
green.
many of those emails I get, by the way, per week that are like, we listen to your podcast and we want to sponsor it. It's never AG1. They're too big for us, but it's like some like weird biohacking product.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, then you haven't listened to our podcast because
Yeah.
you know that I would never associate with your product.
I just
good try.
I love it with like a lot of the green sponsors at this point. You get people promoting them on podcasts, being like, I don't normally like this product, but this one's good. And I'm going,
this one, yeah.
Oh, this one's different. Yeah. It's because I get it for free. It's better. Anyway,
Absolutely.
Sorry.
It makes my poops a pretty color. Like that's so jumping in, Trevor, I know that you have ordered yours already. Yep. So I'm going to ask you right off the bat, why did you put extra recovery as your least important?
Because a lot of the things that people will look to add as extra recovery, and by extra recovery, I mean cold plunges, saunas, theraguns, they often actually reduce the training effect or the effects you get from your training. Best example of this is cold plunge, where someone takes a cold plunge after every workout they do, they might feel great, but they're going to make no gains. They often cost a lot and they require a lot of time and add in a lot of stress. So usually the recovery modalities that I'll recommend to athletes are actually taking away things and taking away stress rather than adding things in. So I think the best recovery tool someone can add is 60 to 90 minutes of watching YouTube and Netflix and having their legs up on the couch rather than forcing themselves to do a 3-minute cold plunge every day. So that's why it's probably the only one on this list that actually has very strongly a negative effect to training and not just a high cost associated to it.
Yeah.
How do you agree?
I really like that, because I was going to say, well, why don't we start out with what we think is like the number 1 and the number 20? And I agree with you on that, because I think a lot of this falls into the category of people trying to like kind of min-max the recovery and say, okay, well, I've got all this stuff. There's some lifestyle things I can't take care of. I can't take care of my sleep and all that. But what else can I do to help myself recover better? And with all this extra recovery stuff, the cost per incremental benefit starts to go way, way up. The idea that sleep is free and some supplements cost money, and then like recovery tools tend to get more and more expensive the smaller percentage difference they theoretically make. And now you see these cold plunges and you're like, whatever happened to just like filling up a bath with cool water and going and buying yourself a 99-cent bucket or like bag of ice and dumping it in there? Now they've got cold plunges you can buy, and these things are like, in some cases, thousands of dollars. And like you said, in a lot of cases, they are counterproductive. And I think there's really this idea that, okay, well, if it feels good, there must be some benefit to it. And people look at a lot of short-term data and go, well, okay, yeah, it doesn't reduce delayed onset muscle soreness, but it does somewhat improve the perception of discomfort during recovery. And that suddenly becomes the selling point. And like you said, a lot of these things that diminish or reduce short-term discomfort after a workout are actually doing that because they're truncating some of the necessary adaptations. You're reducing blood flow when the body's trying everything it can to increase blood flow. And yeah, they said they very are often counterproductive. Even things like theraguns, for example, where some people are using them and they're actually like either causing bruising or microtrauma, or what they're doing is they're causing disinhibition in a muscle group that they actually need to be tight and or braced during exercise. It's like, yeah, I kind of worked this out so I could get more range of motion and all that. And I'm going, you're basically shutting this muscle's, spindle reflexes, which are there to protect the joint. You're shutting those off right before you're working it. So not only is
one of the craziest things I always see. One of the craziest things I see is people theragunning their quads before a bike race. Like, what? Why are you doing this? What are you doing? This is actually going to hinder your performance. Maybe the only thing worse that you could do before activity is like really long kind of yin yoga. I'm holding this stretch for 5 minutes, kind of stretching.
Yeah.
And then after that, it would be theragunning your quads before a bike race. It's kind of, it's crazy how good the marketing is for theraguns to make people think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and it's interesting because with all of these things, I think there is some application, like a cold plunge.
Absolutely.
Look, if you are going immediately from one high intensity event to the next, and you've got to perform in an hour, and you know that after this one event, you got an hour to get back out there, by all means, jump in an ice bath. It's not the best for you long term, but that might be the only way you're going to be able to get to that start line. By all means. But like you said, I mean, this isn't even like C tier. This is like F tier. Like, please don't do. Yeah, so 100% with you on that.
So hopefully to get away from just following my list, rather than me giving my next one, I would say, what would you guys put in the 19th spot, the second worst position?
I'm probably going to put specific supplements in there. And that's talking about things like fat burners, beta alanine, testosterone boosters, because I think a lot of these things, look, beta alanine has pretty good data.
Yeah.
I would say that, creatine is the basic supplement, so we won't go there. But like a lot of this stuff, some of it does have good data and some of it can really be useful. But I think a lot of it, again, we're talking about that like more and more time and money and mental investment spent on diminishing returns. I think a lot of this stuff like testosterone boosters, even the ones that work, clinically work, we can get into a whole explanation now of statistics that'll be interesting to like one or two people maybe, but that talks about like the difference between the Pearson coefficient that's showing an 80% improvement in testosterone levels, but in reality it means absolutely nothing. A lot of this stuff is, yes, they can show some benefit in the lab or statistically speaking, but is this actually going to make a difference to you as an athlete? And I think in many of the cases, if everything else is in place, these things make such a small difference that they're kind of throwaway.
And adding to that point, a lot of the studies where these supplements, specifically testosterone boosters, show a benefit is often in inactive populations that are already low on testosterone. So if their testosterone is below the expected levels in men over 50, then taking some of these supplements can have an effect. But a lot of people that are in their 30s, 40s that are already active, they're paying attention to their nutrition and their sleep, where their testosterone is in the expected levels, the effect is extremely, extremely debatable.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I had put specific supplements in the 18th spot, and I put NEAT in my 19th spot. And the reason for that is because when I made my list and I made my order, I kind of had my typical client in mind that trains 5-6 days a week, anywhere between 5 to 8, maybe 10 hours a week. And for those people that are getting those above recommended levels of minimum physical activity, the difference between 5,000 steps and 10,000 steps, or even more than 10,000 steps, is so negligible that I don't even want them to pay attention to it. They're already running 2-3 times a week. They're lifting weights 2-3 times a week. So the difference there is going to be negligible. So I really don't care how many steps they hit a day.
Well, and that's actually another area where, in a lot of cases, it was the way the statistical analysis was done on a lot of these studies that show the incremental benefit from 5,000 to 6,000. And really all that they're doing is they're trying to correlate different buckets of activity towards things like all-cause mortality, which, even when you're looking at studies that look at 50,000 people, the statistical power on that is so low. It's like, hey, look, is it... The question with so much of this stuff, especially when you go to NEAT, is it that you go from 5,000 to 8,000 steps a day, or is it that people who have lifestyles that let them get 8,000 steps a day are healthier than people with lifestyles that have them get 5,000 steps a day? And that's what so much of it comes down to. And I was tempted to say that, to put pretty low as well, but you never want to discourage people from thinking about activity. And I think this is where sometimes the steps thing gets mixed up, is because the average person goes, well, look, if they're only getting 2,000 steps a day and you say, hey, look, you should be getting more like 6,000 or 7,000, and they go, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll park a little bit further away, or, maybe I'll take the dog out for a walk every night. I should do that anyway. And like, as something that gets people to be active in ways that they should be anyway, it's not a bad thing. But, I think to that point, it's like, look, try to adjust your lifestyle in a realistic way to up your NEAT, but don't make a certain number of steps or like a certain level of activity a goal.
Yeah.
It's like, think about it, keep it in the back of your head. How could I be a little bit more active? But don't make it anything super concrete or specific. That's my view on it. Ariana, I know that you've actually in the past worked with populations where this is a kind of a much bigger thing. What do you think on it?
Yeah. I've worked with Gen Pop and in weight loss for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I was working in Gen Pop and weight loss when steps was like the thing to recommend.
Mhm.
Like it was like the way that you were going to lose weight. And I had the very obese clients in pain because it hurt to walk. Or they would get like a walking treadmill for their desk and then they would develop plantar fasciitis or they would develop like lower limb discomfort. Because I mean the impact on their lower limbs going from 2,000 steps a day to trying to hit 8,000 steps because they felt there was some reward. It was actually causing physical injury. They're just heavy. It's uncomfortable for them. I had one woman who was no longer riding her Peloton because it didn't count. It didn't add to her steps anymore.
Mhm.
And I think that's what always pissed me off about it, with this sort of like blasé. And I know that nuance is difficult, and I know that it's so difficult to express something in a way that gives everyone what they need, every listener what they need from what you're saying. But at the time, and I think I'd say that's about like 5 years ago now, it was like everyone was giving like the 10,000 step target. And she was like no longer riding her Peloton because the hour she would rather just walk in circles in her living room. But she was reaching a much higher intensity on the Peloton and probably getting far more cardiovascular benefit.
Mhm.
But to her, it like didn't add to her steps, and she couldn't close the ring on her Apple Watch if she
Yeah.
wrote it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think for me, just watching that kind of in the fitness space, it's a lot of coaches talking to other coaches, and it's a lot of coaches talking to clients that have been in it for a while or already know, um, or they have a lifestyle already that the steps is easy for them. But I think we always forget the very, very like general population people who are like clinging to, okay, what's the rule I need to follow? What's the one thing I need to do? And if you say 10,000 steps, they're going to go, I have no idea how I'm going to do that. I may as well not try.
Yeah.
Or they'll give up something else. Like another woman, I had to like reassure her that getting an under desk elliptical was okay.
Yeah.
Because
And
it
I think
wasn't
steps has been assigned as the proxy measurement of neat, but it's
Mhm.
not neat at all. The
It's
neat
not
is
neat.
not.
No, yeah. And I think
It's
when you prescribe it, it becomes exercise.
yeah,
You know,
and it's funny that the mention of if you register an activity with your watch, it doesn't count those steps
Yeah.
towards your daily total. So I figured there's a podcast I was listening to, and someone that's relatively fit said that they stopped counting their steps and they just went and played pickleball for an hour a couple of days a week, and that
Yeah.
covered off their requirements for basic low level cardiovascular activity. But if he registered his pickleball on his watch, those steps didn't count towards his daily total. But if you're jumping around and shuffling on a pickleball court for an hour, you're probably getting in a few thousand steps anyways, that
Yeah.
just because they weren't counting are just as effective as going for an hour long walk.
Yeah.
I think maybe
There's a social component too. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah.
Sorry.
no, that's absolutely well. That's actually another thing, a really good conversation that I think I've had with a couple coaches who've worked with general population, is that sometimes doing some activity with a social component is just as much associated. So when you look at what's really interesting, when you look at a lot of these longevity studies, and you look at a lot of like behaviors and lifestyle factors that actually improve health going into older age, is there is a massive, massive positive social component to a lot of things involving health, mental acuity, staving off of even like what you can do to stave off certain kinds of dementia. Like there is a huge, huge networking, like people who have a continued social network do better in pretty much every single health category. it's remarkable. I mean, even we're talking about like, chronic diseases and things like that, or even things like heart disease, because you have people who are engaged in activities that keep them accountable to other people. It gives them an external locus of, positivity or energy or feedback or anything else. So it's kind of like going, well, yeah, if you have a choice between like trying to up your steps or like going to yoga class, as an older, and you say, well, I'm not getting any steps there. And, maybe it's not the most evidence-based thing for whatever. That can still be a bigger positive benefit. So I think almost the way I would almost look at steps and need and all that is, when you talk to somebody, you go, well, they go, oh, well, I'm only getting 2,000 steps a day. And you go, well, what would you do during a normal day that you think you should do anyway that might get you a bit more active? And they go, well, maybe I'll take the dog for a walk and all that. And yeah, but I'm still only getting 4,000. Then you go, okay, but 4,000 should be about what you get then. Let that be your need. It doesn't have to be 10,000. Just follow habits that are going to get you moving a little bit more. And just use your steps as a way to make sure you're engaging in those habits. Hey,
there's a point I think is important to mention with what Ariana mentioned from Gen Pop versus I consider this more from like a trained athlete standpoint, is that the relative intensity towards that person matters. So the people I was talking about that are already running a couple times a week, going to the gym a couple times a week, adding in an extra 3,000 steps is going to be at such a low intensity that it's relative to their capacity that it's not going to have a huge impact. But someone that's completely sedentary, that starts to use steps or their just general activity or some kind of social activity as a vector to be getting active on a regular basis is going to have a much larger impact than on someone that is working out 5-6 days a week already.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Oh.
So we've gone 20 minutes, so we've gone through 3 of them. That's good. That's pretty sweet.
I knew that was going to happen.
So
let's go most important.
Go to most important? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll let you guys add because I have my list ahead of time, so I'll let you guys go for
it. Poof. God, you can make cases for so many of these things.
I know. I saw the list and I was like, Trevor, you bastard.
I know. Because it's tempted to go with, general nutrition and sleep as being the top. But, obviously you can sleep and eat all day, and that doesn't get you very far. In fact, that gets a lot of us into those problems. So, that's tough to say. I mean, because you can also make an argument that consistency is at the top. And I know that is always, consistency is 90% of the battle and all that. And it's kind of cliche, but I think consistency to me is more about continuing to find ways to make an existing healthy or active lifestyle work for you. It doesn't mean doing the same thing every day. It doesn't mean like I'm going to the gym every single day. It basically means that like when in doubt, you've established enough health or fitness seeking behaviors in your life that all else being equal, you're going to opt for one of those if you get derailed from your program. Yeah. And I think that to me is like consistency is like not catastrophizing setbacks. Consistency is finding ways to balance something positive for yourself, even when you're in a situation where you're surrounded by other negatives, like picking the healthiest thing on a menu, doing a 15-minute run in the morning when you're on vacation, even if you can't do your hour run. Like, to me, that's consistency. It's just making choices that maintain things as much as possible when in doubt. But it's nebulous. I don't know. What about you guys?
I'll let Ariana give her answer, and then I'll say my top 3 because it's very in line with what you said, Alex.
Trevor, how would you define training environment?
Going into a place where you feel encouraged and motivated to do the work you're supposed to do.
Okay. Because I would almost put that first.
Okay, interesting.
Because I think that lends itself to consistency, and then consistency encourages structure and specificity. Okay. I mean, even just thinking about myself right now, this is like very like me focused as an answer, but like I'm exhausted. I have a baby, so I'm not sleeping. I'm eating it. I'm not even eating dinner some nights. Like everything else on that list for me, my priority, like they're not, we are not peak condition right now, friends. My motivation is in the toilet. And for me, something as simple as like, yeah, I could actually go train in the garage. And some people might argue that like having a home gym is the difference between being able to work out and not. But I just want to leave the house.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, having like a cheap gym membership where I can just go to a regular boring Globo gym just because it's not my house makes me feel more encouraged to work out than if I was in my own house. So like for some people, it's having a yoga mat in their living room and they can do some push-ups and stuff. For me, it's like I need to get outside or I need to get out of the house in order to want to train. I will be so much more consistent if I feel like I have a place to go to or a space that encourages me to train, or like a run route that I know it's going to take me X amount of time and I know what to expect. I'm more likely to do it than if I don't know what's going to happen and I don't know if I'm going to want to finish once I start.
Okay.
So like for me, I feel like training environment lends itself to the rest of them and encourages the rest of them.
Yeah.
Um,
That's an interesting perspective. I hadn't considered it like that.
Yeah.
I'm kind of in the situation where I have very specific goals, and I kind of it's probably a bit more performance focused goals than what you have considered, and it's kind of that's where my motivation and my discipline for consistency comes from, is those goals and that specificity. But I can definitely see the argument where having an environment that you feel encouraged and is setting you up for success can be a huge component. I put training environment way down my list because I didn't consider that.
But I think this is really good though, because that's one of those things that is sometimes easy to forget. And I'm even thinking about like my work environment here. Like when I sit down and do programming on Sunday, I wake up usually at 4 o'clock and I sit down and I do like client programming for 10 to 12 hours straight. And I don't really get up much. And I realized that creating like the office environment that I like with the right ambiance and the right equipment it makes it so much easier to do the work. And I think that's a little bit of training environment isn't just the perfect environment. And it's not just saying, okay, I need to be in this kind of gym or anything else, but it's saying that like to establish some level of consistency, I need to feel like I have access to what I want to do. Or like, you don't, if you're already feeling low on motivation, you don't want to walk into a garage gym and realize that all the plates that you need are still stacked on something else. Or, you're stepping over something to get to the piece of equipment that you want. And I think what all this comes down to is reducing barriers to actually doing the activity that you need to do. And like finding yourself an environment that minimizes the barriers towards actual training. So,
and I think there's definitely a part of training environment that could include training partners, and again, that social component. For me personally, running is the worst thing. I can't stand it, but I do it anyways just because it's a good thing health wise, and cycling is not the best thing for your bone density and your bone health.
yeah.
And I think there is definitely a human component to being able to move efficaciously through space. That running accomplishes more than any other sport. So I've been going to. There's this thing in Quebec called the 6 a.m. Club, and it's basically running meetups at 6 a.m. at different coffee shops throughout the season, throughout the city,
Yeah.
and then you go and do a little 5K run at like a 6 kilometer pace, 6 minute per kilometer pace, and then everyone hangs out for coffee after. So that's how I've been getting in my runs, just because my girlfriend goes there. We go with our dog. There's coffee. And it's been much easier for me mentally to actually run when I can't stand running, to go through it in that environment, have that group of 20 or 30 people do it as well.
Yeah. All right. So what are your top three?
So my top three are structured training, consistency, and then individualized coaching. The reason I put structured training ahead of individualized coaching is that 80-20 rule thing. So if someone has a plan, they're not just going in the gym and doing whatever machine is empty. They're not just they don't have just like a 5K loop that they do however they feel every day, and but they actually have some kind of plan that leads towards what they are doing, and whether it's a general plan or it's something they made themselves. Having that structure, I think, kind of is is the best way to set yourself up to discover all those later things and move forward. So there's so many people that their consistency comes from, that's what was written down, that's what's in my calendar, that's what I need to do, and that's what's in my plan. So I think following some kind of structured directional plan towards your goals, whether it's performance based, whether it's health based, whatever, is probably the thing that has the most effect on setting people up to have success in moving towards those goals. Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, no. And the consistency standpoint comes from, you have to actually do the work that's in your structured plan,
yep.
And you have to be relatively consistent and relatively regular in that work moving forward. And then individualized coaching is third, because one, the cost aspect of it, which is not negligible, but also if you're already following a structured plan, a coach is going to help you tailor towards that, more specifically towards your situation. So someone that works shifts can't follow the same plan as someone that works in 9 to 5, and the coach is going to help you figure that out. And then also all these other things that are maybe less important but can be very important as well, depending on the person's situation. The coach is going to help them make those decisions on it depends, which is the universal answer for everything.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about like just putting it depends on like a whiteboard for this conversation and just holding it up on every single one. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, and I like that. And you said a lot of that is about, again, kind of like reducing, there's all this talk on how good habits and, habit formation in the morning, it frees up that, executive buffer for actual hard decisions and reducing, it's like little things. Like when you look at how in the corporate world, knowing exactly what you're going to wear every day and having a business suit is such a huge mental blessing, because that's one less thing to think about in the morning. Yeah. You're just like, hey, do I put on my herringbone navy suit or my gray one today? Like, that's the extent of the decision making. And, it's all those things that the more established habits you have and the more that you don't have to think about, the more, the more executive decision making could go towards other things that matter more. And so everything you're talking about, and I think what we've been talking about, removing barriers to training, being in a good situation where you know what you're going to do on any given day and all of that, that is all absolutely top of it. And like I said, it all comes down a lot to, consistency, to habits, and to eliminating the things that are going to be your stumbling blocks. And I think that's kind of like, even just with your two guys' different perspective on that, I think there's a lot of that in common. Is it's like, okay, here are the things that could derail me otherwise. Let me eliminate these as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. You mentioned, Alex, that sleep and general nutrition could easily put into your top spot. I have them in my top 10, but definitely not in my top 5. So I would like to see if you have, maybe if you can make a justification for why it should be in the top spot. Those things should be in the top spot.
Well, my thought is with both of those things, it's always incremental benefits. Most of us don't get enough sleep, and most of us aren't perfect on our nutrition. And saying it's the most important thing does a disservice, I think. It's almost unduly discouraging to people who are like, yeah, I'm not getting any sleep and my nutrition sucks. Does that mean I can't make progress? No, absolutely not. Yeah. And I feel like if it was like top 5, people would think, okay, well, if I don't get this dialed in, I'm not going to go anywhere. And the number of nutrition coaches and companies and everything else that are like, well, nutrition is 90% of your results. And I'm going, that's bullshit. It's important, don't get me wrong, but it facilitates results. And, I think to me, sleep and general nutrition should kind of be like a big umbrella that's over everything else you do, where it's like, yeah, the better it can go, the better you're going to be, but you can still make progress even if it sucks. It's just, it can always be a little bit better. So it's not the top thing, but it's like, this is always a worthy consideration in the back of your head.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I put general nutrition in like the 6th spot.
Yeah.
And I put sleep in the 9th spot, which is probably further down than I would have expected to put it. But it's kind of, they're both things that if you hit a plateau of diminishing returns very quickly with both. So sleep, if you're sleeping 7 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours for some people, you kind of hit a plateau where sleeping more has very diminishing effects. And same thing for nutrition. If you're in a calorie balance and you're eating adequate protein for your body size, after that, the gains from if you're eating 23% fat versus 27% fat is so minuscule that it's kind of, once you hit the minimum of calorie balance and a significant protein to recover from your efforts, it's pretty, the returns diminish very quickly. So that's why I put those kind of at extreme ends of the top 10. Whereas actually doing the work is the thing that makes you make gains towards your success. So if you can sleep and you can eat all you want, but if you're not actually putting in the work, you might be a very healthy person, but you're not going to be a very successful athlete.
Yeah, I'd agree. Ariana, I'd ask you what you think on sleep, but that seems almost mean.
Well, no, I think I would rate it similarly, like kind of in the middle, because I mean, I've been getting between maybe 2 to 3 hours of sleep at a time. I mean, I got 4 in a row last night, which is pretty awesome. But like maybe 6 hours total has been the most I've had in like 10 months, and I've made progress. So with the most broken, fractured bullshit sleep possible, like I've gotten fitter, I'm getting leaner. I eat like a lot of bagels and chicken nuggets and eggs, and I've lost weight and my training is better and I'm fueled fine. Like it's looked better for sure, but I'm still doing okay because all of the other stuff is what I'm auto regulating. I'm making sure that on days I don't sleep as much, maybe I don't do as intense work, or I don't expect myself to be able to do sprints that day. I'll just do like sub tempo or something. But like, I believe like what you said, Trevor, like keeping the other ones like kind of like top 5 to 6 the same, and just sort of, in my case, maybe even like rotating priorities based on just how I'm feeling. I've been making progress, like, and in some cases, kind of insane progress back towards where I was. But if I was like, oh my God, I'm not sleeping, I should probably just stick to doing like a workout that's gentle or like something like that, I would have missed out on a lot of the higher intensity work that I think I really needed to kind of kickstart myself back towards anything resembling fitness. So, I mean, I would rate them in the middle. Also because like I've worked with so many people on general nutrition and no one eats the same. Like you said, Trevor, like as long as your protein needs are met and you're generally isocaloric, I like the amount of the variety in diets that I've seen, whether it's ketogenic or like vegan, and people do just fine as long as they're training hard enough. I mean, it kind of just, like you said.
That is one of the things that always kills me is when, like more elite athletes are talking about like, yeah, I owe everything to this nutrition program by so-and-so. And you look at the nutrition program and it's like the most basic thing there is. And you're going, okay, well, there's clearly no magic to it. You're just consistently doing pretty good stuff. And for once, you're actually paying attention to it because you've got some like world-renowned person telling you the same thing that you needed to be doing all along, but you're actually listening to it. So good job. Congratulations. Well, but that actually makes me think now, okay, so the other side of nutrition. So we agree that general nutrition is like important, but kind of as an overarching. What about intra-workout nutrition? And the reason I really want to bring that one up is because I think it's it depends based on what your goal is.
Oh, I would disagree. Based on what your goal is, yes, but so I put intra workout nutrition in the 11th spot, mostly because if you don't have good general nutrition, it's very much a band-aid. But if you do have good general nutrition, it can set you up in such a good place. But I've seen so many cases of people where just starting to consume a minimal amount of carbs during the workout has completely drastically changed what they're able to do and the amount the rate at which they improve.
Mm-hmm.
That I feel like intra workout nutrition, once you kind of have your base nutrition in place is probably one of the biggest performance enhancers that people could do, especially for endurance athletes that are really aiming for endurance.
And I think that to me, and Ariana, get your thoughts on it too. But for me, that's the biggest difference there, because I think for endurance athletes and for athletes who are otherwise relatively dialed but have more challenging training sessions, I think it opens up a huge realm of possibilities in terms of being able to continue to extend training quality throughout the course of a session. I mean, even just the whole, like cephalic insulin response and just how the taste of sugar can improve your power output, in the next couple minutes. I mean, that's pretty remarkable stuff and has a tangible impact. But other side of the coin is people who are just general nutrition or general population lifting weights in the gym and think that they need to have an intra workout. And in reality, they may be significantly better off just not skipping lunch. So I think there are some cases where intra-workout nutrition is being pushed as something they need to be doing, when in reality, they're probably not training hard enough to get any benefit from it. And I think that's where I'd say it's way down at the bottom. So it goes from either a game changer for more intense athletes to something that is sort of, like you said, a bit of a Band-Aid and probably not even needed for another group.
Yes, I agree, but I also think there's a big argument for having that person that maybe isn't training hard enough, and this maybe would again apply more to endurance athletes that like they're going out for a tempo session, and like the last interval they're kind of just getting lazy and dropping it off, but actually getting them to like, hey, take a bottle with 30 grams of Gatorade in it is gonna make them feel better at the end of the workout, so they might start training hard enough. Sure. So that, I hate this word, but so that they deserve those intra workouts. It's not deserve at all. That's the worst word I could use, but I can't think of a better one currently. But they should have those carbs. So it's kind of, they're not hitting the targets at the end of the workouts, even though theoretically they should be able to, but just giving them that little bit of boost in the form of 30 grams of sugar during an hour-long workout is going to cause them to train harder. And I think for me personally, and for a lot of athletes I've coached, they've actually noticed a bigger effect on tomorrow's session from their fueling during their current workout, where if they hit that 45, 60 grams of carb during their shorter VO2 session today, when I send them out for a long run the next day, they feel more topped up. They're not dragging their feet at the beginning of it. So yeah, I agree. I get where you're coming from that, but I feel like adding in 30 grams of Gatorade to someone's bottle they're going to have anyways in the gym is probably a non-factor in their actual global nutrition, but it can be a huge motivation boost and kind of a little bit of a big benefit just from that mental standpoint.
Okay. Yeah. With that, Ariana, what do you think?
I mean, I agree with both you guys. I think it depends on, oh my God, I do need to make that sign. I just had to make us all shirts.
We could rename the podcast as CHP It Depends Podcast.
It depends. Yeah. I was going to say, for me, something that I recommend a lot to my clients, because I work with a lot of people that have chronic illness, injury, pain, myself included, or like poor sleep. I just work with people that have issues. And something that I recommend a lot is bringing a food that they really look forward to on their runs, longer efforts, and in their strength sessions. And like literally just having a bite of it before a hard effort. So rather than like something like ammonia or something that like, which some people that I work with do use like ammonia or like nose torque, but just bringing gummy bears and just being like, sprinkle them across your heavy efforts, or something that you really look forward to. Like you said, Alex, the way that it positively impacts power output for a brief period after you have something sweet that tastes good. Sometimes it's the difference between getting your athlete who's already kind of struggling with peak power output and focusing on something and making it feel rewarding, and getting them to do the work and actually feel slightly better right before they do it. I don't know, for me, I've just seen a big change in athlete outlook across the course of a workout.
Mhm.
They're more positively inclined towards the effort that they've put in. Even if the effort is just like slightly better than the week previous, they seem to think that it's the best effort they could have done, rather than like without the intra workout fueling. Sometimes there's a question about like maybe they were too tired or maybe they didn't have enough energy. But like if they did actually eat and they've eliminated that variable, they seem so much more inclined to be like, yeah, this is what I had in me today.
Mhm.
So I've found that can be useful for like reducing noise. But this leads me into my question to you, Trevor, and then to you, Alex. Mental grit is right in the middle.
It's actually gonna.
It's right in the middle, Trevor. Why is it in the middle? It's after sleep. What about carrying the boats, Trevor?
What if you don't live by the ocean? There is no boats. And this is, I definitely, I put mental grit right in the middle just because it is a deciding factor between the very, very elite and someone that's just an average athlete and someone that maybe doesn't train just because they don't like to train. So mental grit probably is, it definitely is a big factor in where someone sits in their range of potential. But it comes back to doing the work imperfectly and doing the work consistently at 60, 70, 80% of what the maximum you could possibly do would be, is definitely a thing, or is definitely better than how can I say this? Yeah, so someone that just goes to the gym, goes and does a run, and just kind of goes through the motions is going to still get a lot of benefits. They're going to get 80% of the benefits of someone that's really driving and killing themselves and doing the maximum they could do every day. So that's why I put mental grit pretty much in the middle, because it is a deciding factor of where people will stand on their genetic potential, but the difference is going to be very minimal.
Alex.
I was going to say my next. So this is I guess I've got really, really mixed feelings on this because I think I agree. Like at the top echelon, it's extraordinarily important, and I think one of the things I go back to is again, there's been data collection on people who've been successful in things like military selection. And they looked at a cross section of individuals who completed successfully, looked at a lot of the psychological profiles. And interestingly enough, among other factors, one of the common factors associated with success was this idea that willpower is not a fixed quantity.
Yeah.
And the idea, and I think a lot of us that resonates with it, you think, okay, well, look, if I spend all my willpower, if I do this now, or I devote myself to this now, or I'm going to have less willpower for other things. And that is, I mean, and yes, this was just selection, but I think that applies to a lot of things athletically, is like, you have to have this standpoint that willpower is not something that's going to exhaust. And I think keeping that as kind of the cornerstone to this mental grit idea is really key, because for me, mental grit isn't this idea that, okay, I'm going to go all out, like this time I'm going to smash it. If something hurts, I'm going to do it anyway. The whole Goggins mentality. I don't think that's it. But I think, Trevor, a little bit more of what you've been saying there is, it's this idea that, okay, I can do this. I can make this work. Cards are, deck is stacked against me right now, but I'm going to find a way to at least get some of this done. Yeah, I'm tired. Can I do this one interval, or should I quit and go home? Well, I'm not going to just go balls out on it. I'm going to think, okay, is this going to do me good? Or am I going to be hurting myself here? Like, am I quitting on this because I don't feel like it? In which case, there's always that thought like, okay, well, do I put in the mental effort to go do this? Am I going to burn out if I can do it? Well, if you believe that mental grit and willpower is infinite, you're going to do it anyway. The only reason you wouldn't do it would be if there's a really compelling factual reason not to. I twisted my ankle on the last run, or, I'm going to be late to, take my kids somewhere. Like, those are valid reasons. But I think because of that, yeah, I think mental grit is really important insofar as that it's this idea that, hey, look, I've got unlimited willpower. It's going to be there. Now, if I quit, it's only going to be for a rational decision. Like, I'm not going to let myself quit or find excuses. So I think that's where the mental grit comes in for most people. for elite athletes, it's the whole like, did you die thing. I mean, you look at the mental grit, and I always just think about, cycling is always the top sport that comes to mind because a lot of people who are non-cyclists who have never cycled at kind of a high level are not yet aware of how intensely uncomfortable every single rider is during most parts of any race. Or you look at a lot of these big climbs in the Tour de France, you realize that these guys' legs have been burning since they got on the hill. And like the deciding factor in a lot of these chases, breakaways, they're all hurting. It's not a question of like who's going to hurt first. It's a question of who is the most willing to continue hurting themselves knowing they're not going to break. And that's where it all comes down to. So I think I think it's hugely, hugely important, but I don't necessarily think it means the Goggins style, like, who's going to carry the boats, because I mean, at the end of the day, we don't have this.
You mentioned about willpower not being kind of a expendable resource, and I think we all know examples of people who they suddenly found a new motivation or a new reason to get healthy, to train, that suddenly their willpower was 10x, 100x. People that they became parents and realized how important it is for them to be healthy. They had a health scare and realized they need to do this to prolong their life. They found a new sport and they're going crazy for it. So willpower is kind of like motivation, where it comes and goes, and you're going to find something to do, find something to give you that willpower eventually, or maybe not, but it's putting in the work that, whether it's perfect or not, that is going to make the biggest difference.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest issue with the word grit is just, like you said, it's sort of been co-opted by the extreme end of sport.
Yeah.
It's been taken on by these elite athletes who, and they may not even realize it, a lot of them don't. They have tailored their entire lives, like everything we talked about earlier with consistency and training environment and everything like that, structured training. They've already done all of that for so long. And they've done that to such an extreme because they're obsessed with that goal, or they're so fixated on that target, that they don't realize that a lot of the barriers that other people have that they need to overcome, they've already taken care of or don't even look at. For them, waking up at 4:30 in the morning is just a non-negotiable. It's something they've always done. It's something they're going to do. It doesn't matter. Eating a certain way doesn't bother them. They don't think about it. Something they've always done. They know how to do it. Training hard. They've always done. Like, there's just so much for these higher level athletes where their grit, quote unquote, is going towards the training. Mm-hmm. And I think, to both of your points, for a lot of people, the really gritty stuff comes with establishing what a training environment do I need? What excuses am I making for myself? How do I stay consistent? Can I actually do a little bit of work today, even if it's not what I want to do, or it doesn't look as cool as I want it to look? To me, real grit is kind of in that like murky, uncool stuff that you're sort of forced to push through, especially if you're not a well-established elite athlete. The discomfort and choosing to put yourself through that discomfort, sometimes the most uncomfortable part is getting to it for a lot of people.
The reason I really like that is, I would say for some people, the mental barrier, like, okay, I've only got 40 minutes to get this workout in, but it means I gotta, change, get out there. Still gotta take a shower. I gotta do this other. That can require more mental grit. Actually going, well, I'm just gonna do it. Actually getting out there and coming to terms with the fact that your shower is going to be a little rushed may take more mental grit for some people than being like, okay, I've got to sprint this last hill and my legs are going to be falling off and I'm probably going to puke at the top. That's exciting. That's the fun kind of grit. That's the kind of grit when you're already out there, like pushing into it for like one more hard round, upping the intensity. That's the sexy kind of grit that people like. Oh, my hands are out here. My hands are bleeding, but I'm going to do a couple more sets. That's the fun kind of grit. The other kind of grit that doesn't get enough credit is the grit that's like, hey, sometimes I got to just do the boring. I'm going to do something that's disruptive to my calm. I'm not already in training mode. I'm not already in hype mode. I need to disrupt my calm and get the willpower to get together and actually go do that. That's the kind of grit, too, that I think is understated sometimes. And it's not as sexy as the other kind.
Yeah.
No.
It's
And I think
easier
for
to
most
dig
people,
in and go ahead.
no, I say that for most people, it's the unsexy grit. That
And I was just gonna say it's definitely easier if you all you do is you train 35 hours a week and you go and do your 5 hour workout and then you just put your legs up on the couch and answer emails, maybe answer emails on your phone while you sit around the rest of the day, than it is if you have to go and get the best workout you can in 60 minutes, shower, get your kids to work or get your kids to school, and then go work your 9 to 5 the rest of the day. It's definitely a different thing than be a professional athlete.
Yeah.
yeah, no one's more out of touch than professional athletes in my opinion.
So
So if
So
we get more to, I want to see where you guys put these, and these are three. These are four. No, I'll start with three, and we'll add in the fourth one that are very, very related. But a lot of people refer to them as a triangle that you kind of pull different levers and extend the triangle in one direction. I put these all in my top 10 very close together, but in what order would you put the priority of training specificity versus training volume versus training intensity? And which of those three would you say is most important for the average person that's already training a few hours a week and wants to improve or increase their rate of improvement?
volume, intensity, and specificity.
Yeah.
See, that's tough because for me, volume and intensity are both just they're prescriptive. They're the portions of a prescription. They are not in and of themselves separate factors. I think it's a
Okay.
case where they need to be appropriate to the objective. And I think the question of what is ideal training volume is so contextual. Because I know in a lot of sports there's a question like how many miles a week do you need to be a good runner? How many miles a week do you need to be? Well, it's if you're running, let's say you want to be a great marathon runner, if you can't get in 100 miles a week and you're only getting in 70, they've got to be you got to be a little bit more aware of the quality of those miles. Or if you can only get in 60 miles a week, like what's the quality? So those other factors become a little bit more important. You can't, the more specific I think, or the more limited you are, obviously the more you have to look out for the elimination of junk or the elimination of those low return on investment miles that you do. And as I say miles, I can even include things like sets, for example, and lifting. And even specificity, I think sometimes gets taken a little bit too far. Because I think there's often the tendency to think that all athlete training needs to be hyper specific. I saw a discussion once, and no names on this because frankly I don't even remember who was involved. But it was looking at a football player lifting, and one of the people commenting on it was saying that football players shouldn't be lifting with this style anyway. They should be focused on explosion, explosive concentric movement, and blah blah blah. And one of the counters to that was, well, yes, that would be most sport specific. But does every single exercise they do need to be specific? Does it need to be specific to the sport or just specific to overall athletic development? So I feel like you said this is a triangle that I think the most important thing is that this triangle continue to move throughout the season. And you realize that it shouldn't stay static. If you adjust volume, you're going to have to adjust intensity. And if you adjust both volume and intensity, or if you keep those the same, you may be going through a phase where you need to be adjusting your specificity moving into a season. So I think as far as that triangle graph goes, maybe the area inside the triangle should stay the same, but the triangle should always be moving throughout the season. And you should never adjust any one of those without looking at it in context of the other two. So I'd say they're all very near the top in a cluster, and they're all in the same subcategory.
So that brings into the fourth one that I didn't add right away is training periodization. So that's where it comes into adjusting your volume, intensity, and specificity throughout the year to have a season that accumulates to a single goal is going to be pulling on those levers. So that ties in exactly to the point I was trying to make, actually.
Ariana, what do you think on this?
I agree, and I appreciate that Trevor has individualized coaching as number 3, and then the rest of those is 4, 5, 6. Because that makes me go, I really wish someone else would do that for me. But yeah, I consider them kind of one and the same.
Yeah.
because you can't, like Alex says, you can't adjust one or prioritize one without adjusting the other. One thing I do see a lot of, that I think we see a lot of, Alex, you wrote the book on, is excessive training volume and maybe even misplaced specificity, but at the expense of intensity.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think we see that probably the most often as far as like misapplication of said triangle, where it's like lots of work, lots of stuff, like, lots of cold bath use and long warm-ups and all kinds of like weird work and stuff like that, but none of it is actually at the required level of intensity, either loading or intensity or speed, however you want to look at it, to actually push the progress that they're trying to make, or maybe they're just too continuously fatigued. So I would say maybe like insofar as common mistakes, and maybe I'm incorrect, but it seems like in a lot of cases people be doing the most rather than doing the most effective or most quality.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one final point I make on that is, if you look at like a lot of these off the internet marathon programs, every single one of them has somebody steadily increasing mileage every week and steadily making the weekend runs longer and longer. And what I always think is interesting about that is most runners don't just necessarily need to increase their volume going into a race. Like if you're doing your first ever marathon, sure, like by all means, get those longer weekend runs. But when you look at the whole idea that, okay, well, we're not just adjusting volume though, we need to adjust. If we're increasing volume, we need to be, in some cases, all we're doing is increasing volume. We may be actually decreasing specificity and intensity, which may not be what you need if you want to perform well in a marathon. So do we need to be increasing mileage? Or do we need to actually, like, let's say, build up to increase mileage, and as part of the whole periodization scheme, not have your biggest mileage weeks be the ones right before the race, but in fact, as you get closer to it, be doing more fast finish longer runs, or increasing the pace on the back half of your long runs, or doing more race pace work, which will mean upping the specificity and intensity, and maybe with no change or even a decrease in volume. So I think in a lot of cases, it kind of drives home everything I think we're all saying here, in that these are all, there's not any one answer. You can't consider any one of those things in isolation. It should all be under the umbrella of this periodization, and that should be the framework for everything you're doing.
Yeah. So if I go into the order that if I was when I forced myself to put these in order, the order I put them in was, like Ariana mentioned, number 3 was individualized coaching. Number 4 was training specificity. And the reason I put that is because you can do as much volume as you want, but if it's not specific to you and your goals and your training history, to what you need to improve for your target, it kind of comes out in it's not going to be the best training plan for you. So I do think specificity is kind of the overarching thing, and volume and intensity kind of adjust how you set that specificity to the individual. I put volume after specificity because in general, if someone comes to me and says, hey, I normally train 6 hours a week, suddenly in my life I can do more if I want to, should I do the same workouts and just do them harder, or should I add in 2 or 3 or 4 workouts in my week? I'm probably going to recommend for them to do more workouts than do the same workouts harder, because some training zones, there's a limit to the amount of time you can actually spend in them in a single training session. And if you actually look at the amount of additional stress you can add from adding 20 or 30% extra training volume versus the potential maybe 5-10% intensity that you can add, is going to be better. And then training periodization, because that is that lever. And then training intensity is kind of the last one on the cake that you play around with to make the other two fit.
Yeah.
So
all right.
Well, so
we're like, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know we've got a couple we haven't covered, and I want to dig into those. Do we want to do a second session to wrap it up?
Let's do a part 2.
Okay,
because I think we've covered 10.
Yeah, because I would because I really want to cover some of these other ones too, like bodywork, stretching, mobility. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's do a part 2.
Let's do
a part 2.
All right.
So it depends to our heart's content.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you guys. let's cut it off here. I don't know if that's the right way, but
I don't know. Sounds good to me.
It
and
depends.
then we'll reconvene.
Awesome. All right, guys.
All right.
Thanks for the
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, we'll catch up soon then.
Sounds great.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.